Now suddenly it's like data is everywhere. You cannot do anything without good data. And what does good data mean?
It's not about let's optimize to cut costs just for the sake of cutting costs. It's not let's use the same with less, but let's do more with the same.
We need to have a good structure so that we can instruct our consumers. This is where you should be going to get this kind of data.
What advice would you give the other product leaders in organizations that today are starting those shifts?
Don't skip out on doing things once for the organization. Creating proper metadata collection, instrumenting your systems from day one.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Data Innovators. Today I'm with Romit Mehta, Head of Product Data Platforms at Disney. Romit, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Roy. How are you?
I'm glad. I know we're on a Friday, almost end of the day. We're staying between you and the weekend, so let's have a great conversation and looking forward to hear a little bit more from you.
Sounds good. Let's go.
So Romit, maybe let's start with how did you get into building data products? Share with us a little bit about your journey and kind of where you're at today.
Sounds good. So I came to the US to get my master's, and my first job out of my business school was a job with PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and it was a general technical consulting role. And I just so happened to be at a client that was doing data models or ML models for Freddie and Fannie, and making sure that they are capitalized adequately. So if everyone in the country defaults, that they have enough money to pay all those loans back. That was a data warehouse, a very typical data warehouse project with Informatica and everything. And I've not looked back. From that time on, I just got more data projects, more data warehouse projects, business intelligence, dashboarding, and building data portals, and so on. I moved from consulting to full-time roles where I was leading dev teams, building BI solutions, and moved into program management. And then finally, when data product management became an official title, I was one of the first data product managers that joined the PayPal data product team. So since then, I've been in the product world, building data products, data platforms, services, solutions, the whole thing.
Amazing. So what does your team build today, and what are kind of your amazing customers?
Yeah. We are currently, my team's remit is building foundational data products and also managing our data infrastructure platforms and services. So on the foundational data products, we ingest and manage some of our underlying data that produces clickstream and user behavior metrics. How many people watched a certain thing? How many people watched a show? For how long did they watch it? Where did they click? All of those things. And on the infrastructure, we have multiple, as you could imagine at a very large company, we have multiple data infrastructure platforms. And we've built some tools, homegrown and third party, that make it easy to use these products. So access management, metadata cataloging, retention policy enforcement, cost attribution. It's one thing to have costs, but attributing it to the right team is not as easy as you would think. So building some attribution logic and building providing accountability to the various engineering teams are some of the products that are what I would call platform products that we also build.
Yeah, and attribution and kind of driving accountability with data and data producers, consumers. We'll certainly touch on it probably later on in the conversation, but we're definitely very challenging and important topics. But before we even dive in, just one thing that caught my ear, you mentioned starting, back in the day with the data warehousing space. And I'm sure that today with the move to data lakes and lake houses and ML and AI type of use cases, there's probably big a significant shift in the space and the type of workloads and use cases that you guys are working on. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more about kind of from your perspective, how did it shift in the past decade or two?
Yeah. I think the big shift was when we moved from ETL to ELT, where with the ETL, extract, transform, and load, business analysts had to predetermine where and how the data is going to be landed. So there was a lot of effort up front. There was also the time for waterfall methodology for product development.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very important to have the final data model ready even before you start writing code. And then with big data and the speed that which forced everyone to start first loading data and then figuring out what happens, we started moving into let's just dump everything and figure out what to do with it later. So we started compromising on the data model because, hey, my job is just to efficiently land the data. I'm going to land the data and put some controls on it. What they want to do, what business wants to do with it is not my problem. And then business started consuming that data, building duplicate pipelines, potentially duplicate. I'm not saying everywhere, but it created the speed, but then it also created this second scenario where different teams had different ways of measuring the same thing. So what is a playback or what is an active customer?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on who's creating those pipelines, you may have slightly different definitions for what those mean, which has now brought us to the realization, not just us as a company, but the industry, that we need to have good structure, which is what has created things like semantic models and semantic views. We need to have a good structure so that we can instruct our consumers. This is where you should be going to get this kind of data, whether it's metrics or dimensions or KPIs, whatever it may be. So it has sort of come a full circle, although we have not reached a point where we need to define everything rigidly before we start coding. But Data Lake gave a lot of flexibility to data engineering teams to then build whatever they want at their own pace. We are now getting to a level of we need some structure so that we interpret the data in a consistent way across the company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That completely resonates, and sounds like with the speed, the complexity, potential duplication, ability to trace data lineage, understanding where the duplication, understanding what are the cold tables, maybe cold pipelines that are not really being used downstream.
Correct.
Um, Probably with the speed, also reliability issues that are presenting itself that you maybe didn't have before when things were a little bit more structured. Yeah, those completely resonate. So if I take kind of a holistic view over your journey, it sounds like you were working in two very different industries, financial services and media and entertainment. Tell me a little bit about kind of how the data product work is different, if any, between those industries, and kind of what the parameters that you guys are working in.
Yeah, I think there's some key differences, although the problems may be very similar in terms like when it comes to data management. I think business problems obviously will be different across industries, but from a data management perspective, in finance and fintech, the first consideration, what I observed, is compliance with regulatory requirements. That almost always defines what your products will look like, what your data pipelines will look like. Not like other industries don't do that. There is a huge compliance factor in all industries, but with finance, that's the leader. You start with, is this even allowed to be done? For example, at my previous company, we had, after many, many years, finally decided to move to public cloud. We spent several months just getting permission and approval from various regulatory authorities across the world and agree to certain controls that we'll put by design before we move a single record of data to public cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So that defined what our APIs will look like, that defined what our data pipelines would look like, data organization would look. Everything was because of these constraints, we need to do this. With media, I think there's consideration for governance and compliance with regulatory authorities, obviously, because we are collecting personal data. You can't sign in without providing email or phone number. But the speed at which you can distribute your data, the speed at which you can deliver ads, the speed, the effectivity of providing the right data in right viewership in the right device to the right audience, personalization, recommendation. A lot of those take up your product backlog, and you have to layer all your compliance along all of the individual product backlogs. So it's almost like, where does compliance sit in the hierarchy of requirements? It's not like one is dropped, but I felt like in fintech, we were hamstrung by a lot of these very strict requirements, whether you're a bank or not.
So, with that, again, we talked about the journey and how things evolved in the past, maybe almost a decade and a half or 2 decades. We're in 2025. What are the biggest challenges that data product teams such as yours are really facing right now?
Yeah. So there are two angles I want to take at this. One is, if you are not a data person and you've been brought into the world of data, it is very easy to think that the data teams are making it overly complex. From the outside, it looks like, how hard can it be? You bring in the data and you lay it out and you point a notebook at it, or you write some SQL and you create some dashboards. Most of the dashboard companies advertise themselves as, hey, just install our thing, or it's a SaaS product. Go to this URL, connect to Snowflake, and boom, suddenly you will have your dashboards. That is, at least beyond a certain size that a company gets into, it is a misperception. I think once you start working in data, you realize that there's one team that manages, for example, all subscribers. There's another team that manages all of the product engagement. There's another team that manages content viewership. There's another team that manages marketing preferences. And for understanding how the business is doing, you need a little bit of everything. So when something changes for subscribers, it's important that if there are any metrics that have the count of subscribers in the denominator, they understand that there was a business rule applied that now is going to change the way you count active subscribers. So those numbers are going to start going down. It's not an anomaly. It's a change in definition. And the pipelines obviously over time start crisscrossing. So now you have a circular dependency, and all that, it can only be unraveled once you get into working with data. The other challenge I see these days is, I think we alluded to that a little bit earlier. You have a lot of teams that are doing business specific data products, and they want that agility. So they end up building stuff because there's a new product launching or a new feature launching. We want to quickly build a measurement for it. You build the measurement, but over time you are accumulating tech debt. The more these teams think platform and more they try to build things that can be solved once for many use cases, the better off the organization would be. And I see it as two levels of platform product building, even in the data product world. One is, if you look at the medallion architecture, which I know has got some stink recently, but it still is a very logical way of explaining. You are bringing in the data, which is at the very raw level. You are putting some intelligence into it to say, this is how, like, for example, exploding some of the JSON schemas into meaningful columns and so on. And then you have the actual, here are the data products we want our teams to use. You should be trying to bring more and more into that silver layer so that it can be leveraged by multiple solutions, right? So for a centralized data platform team, it may be a true silver layer, which is everything that we ever consume from anything outside first party and third party. We are landing it here. But for a vertical solutions team, a team that is managing a particular data domain, you still want to create a silver layer for yourself. So here, if you are using Adobe Analytics and you have signals coming from Adobe, here is everything that we've got from Adobe. Now, you can use it for commercial conversion usage, or you can use it for user experience. Here is what they saw, here is what they clicked. But at least the basic knowledge is now shared across all the solutions teams within that experience management set of teams. So I guess what I'm saying is the challenge is there's a lot of solutions being built that may not be adhering to common principles. And the more product managers and engineering leaders think about, let's take more and more stuff down to a common layer, the better off that organization will be, the more speed you will get to the ever-changing business requirements.
Something that we hear a lot from folks we speak with in the space, and if I'm kind of reading between the lines or hearing between the lines, I hear two key themes that I'd like to maybe dig a little deeper on. The first one is you're essentially talking about data as a product, and how do we make the shift from there's a central data team to data is the product.
Mhm.
Talk to us a little bit about the shift and how is that affecting platform teams today versus, again, maybe the more traditional or older model?
Yeah, I see data as a product slightly different from data product, right? Data product in the data mesh world is creating, and maybe you can abstract it out to internal data as a product, but you're creating domains of data
Mhm.
where the team that is producing that domain's data is saying, here is everything you need to know about our domain, to have any kind of measurement for anything within our domain. So I'll take an example of content performance. Here is what content metadata looks like. Here is how many hours people watch this show or this movie or this live event for this much time across this period. How does it compare to similar show that launched last year in the first 7 days or the first 30 days or whatever it is? And data as a product is where, and increasingly with ad-based systems, this is a very common thing where you are saying to an advertiser that if you want to address anyone who's 21 and over in this demographic, in this geography, we have 3 slots for you on this show that you can put your ads on. And media buyers can say, hey, yes, we want this product advertised to be shown for that demographic in this type of show. And there, your data is the product. It's not like you're showing who that person is, but you're saying, we have this inventory available for this kind. So there, having that, the ability to easily create those kind of audiences that can be used to generate revenue, ad-based revenue for the company, I would see that as data as a product. And of course, governance and controls and all of that come into play. And most of the modern cloud vendors provide efficient ways of doing this. So as long as your other parties use one of those Snowflake or Databricks kind of products, you could exchange information pretty securely and safely.
And the second piece that I've again heard kind of between the lines in what you said earlier is really the concept of data democratization. Obviously, not a new one, but with the new platforms, with the ease of use, with the shift of data is somewhere that a specific team in a back room is handling and just providing the dashboard for everyone else to use. All of a sudden, everyone becomes a data analyst, a data engineer, data scientist, someone that handles the data, want to touch the raw data and play with it, experiment with it, and actually get the insights. How does that affect how platform and data product teams think about uh, making this data accessible and
Yeah.
available, and then making sure that the underlying infrastructure is still high performing, reliant, working at the right scale to enable all of that work?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Uh, we want to keep democratizing data. Like the amount of data every company is collecting now, it's virtually unmanageable. But every company's marketing head or CIO, if the tech team is under CIO, or the CTO, they are saying, why are we not leveraging the data? We should be leveraging our data more. So uh, you want to give the data engineers, data analysts, data scientists, uh, more access, more easy access to the data. But like many other companies have already seen, that typically ends up in duplication of effort. It ends up in misinterpretation of data. And with cloud data systems, a huge spike in cost. So it's creating a lot of churn because one team says, active subscriber count is this much. The other team says active subscriber count is this much. And then you see it's not just the definition that's different. They're coming off of different untrusted data sources. One is going through the certified data. The other one is not going through certified data. So it ends up, especially in very executive heavy meetings, it ends up creating a bad impression about data is always wrong, right? Data is not wrong. It's just not being used the way it should be. So some of the things that we are attempting to do, and I've done in multiple places in my past, is create guardrails at the platform layer itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the core platform layer should almost think of, we don't understand data. You can send me milk from one end of the pipe. I'm going to make sure milk comes out of the other end. But along the way, I want to make sure that only those who are allowed to access it. I want to make sure data is laid out and it's retained only how much it's supposed to be retained. I'm going to make sure that like what I said earlier, attribution. Whoever is tapping into this pipe, I can tell them that you took 3 gallons of milk last night and so took 2 gallons of milk last night, and start trending and creating dashboards that say, you are accountable for this part of your consumption. You tell me how much you will consume, and we'll tell you when you go within 80% of that. So set your own watermarks, and we'll alert you when you reach those watermarks. All that has to happen at the lowest layer, because many companies have tried chasing after, but that either becomes a name and shame game, which of course is not very productive in an organization, or it's an endless, like, I remember there used to be every 6 months, there used to be an SOS project.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was for on-prem environment, but still the concept is the same. You have limited resources and you need to make sure you're using them correctly, or you have infinite resources. You have to make sure your bills don't explode. So in both cases, the problem is the same and it needs to be addressed at the platform layer. You have to have the right observability so that it's not just data quality that you are keeping tabs on. You are keeping tabs on access. Who's accessing what kind of data? Who has which kind of role? Is it over provision? Is it under provision? And of course, cost. The next thing is, and we alluded to that earlier, is defining the best way to access data. If you are trying to get to certain type of metric, here are the 10 tables that give you that metric. It's being backed by this product team, and here are the 3 people who you can connect to if you have any questions about that, if you need any enhancements. Creating this and then tracing it all the way to the endpoints. It could be a data feed, it could be a dashboard, it could be a handwritten note, whatever it is, tracing it all the way to the endpoint, saying, this is coming off of certified data, this is not coming off of certified data, will automatically start getting some control over what has become a little bit of a chaos in the data platform, lowercase p, like in the overall data platform world, right? Where everyone is allowed to do whatever they want because speed is more important than anything else. But it creates this situation where you have multiple pipelines doing the same thing, not using the tables that already have prepared data, and then exploding the cost because you are just building stuff that you should not be building, or writing what becomes an inefficient query.
Absolutely. And I think if I tie it back to your previous point about there is, if you want to understand cost, performance, doing things in an optimized way at scale, there is the basic level of attribution, as you alluded to. There is the next level of how do I actually identify what's not optimized, what's inefficient. Some of it can be more infrastructural, some can be much more applicative and code based. And at the third level, of course, at your scale and similar organizations, how do you do that? Even if you understand that there is some inefficiencies, how do you actually go and tackle them again at scale in a meaningful way in order to avoid those SOS projects that you do once a quarter because the CFO is knocking in your door and like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, why did our platform cost spike this month?
Exactly. Yeah. That's and the lower you do, the closer to the source you do these things, the more prevalent it is across the entire organization, right? So yeah.
They tell me shift left. Let's not build the dashboards to track the dashboards.
Exactly. Yeah, you have 20 executives on a call to discuss which executive spent the most and why they spent it. Like, that's not a productive use of anyone's time. In fact, we should be asking them to use data more, right?
Mhm.
We want teams to use data more, not less. By creating these SOS projects, the impression is we should be careful about how we use our data. It should be the message should be you should be using it more. If you want it at a higher frequency, let us know. We can reduce the latency. Go here. If you use these, it is the best data. It is organized correctly. It is aggregated correctly. If you use that, it will inform you. You will know whether your features are working well or not. You will build better features. You will build better experiences because now you are truly data informed.
I really like this approach. It's not about let's optimize to cut costs just for the sake of cutting costs. It's let's not let's use the same with less, but let's do more with the same.
Yeah.
Open up new workloads, open up new use cases, open up um, better scale. I really like this approach. It's really how do we fuel business to do better versus kind of looking back and in retrospect saying how we can cut. Um,
Right.
I think, yeah, I really like this approach. So, we've been probably speaking for around 20, 30 minutes already, and we barely touched on AI, which is very surprising. So let's get to it because it's 2025. So, with everything that we just discussed, products, data platforms, what's kind of the role of AI in all of that, both as an internal tool and as a product at the end of the data product, right? That requires a lot of feeding and new architectural models.
Yeah. It's a good question. And generative AI specifically, I'm assuming that's what you're referring to, right? So the traditional AI, what you would call a relabeled ML, I think we've been doing that forever. There's multiple things in the entire stack. But with generative AI, we have multiple low-hanging fruits that we can enable as an enabler for internal users. So for PM, I lead a PM team. So for PMs, we have simple things like, with these challenges, tell me what an annual strategy memo would look like to speed up. So it's a productivity gain. Or here is a memo I've written for next year's strategy. If you were a CTO of the organization, what kind of questions would you have based on this? So trying to make our artifacts stronger, more comprehensive, but still concise so that it's easy to consume is one good one. On the technical side, there's making people write better code, like code assistants as well as query assistants. Like, you should be joining it with this and filtering this way because 99% of the queries on this table have those two things. So instead of running it against, 3 billion rows with the filter, you will be running it against 10,000 rows, and that will be a better experience because we know that eventually you will have to join and you will have to filter, right? So something like that. We also have things like interpreting PRDs to extract acceptance criteria, right? Someone has written the brief, looking at all of the requirements, say what does an engineering team need to do to satisfy those requirements, and then of course vet it. So you do need that human in the loop. This is all productivity gains. These are not end solutions. One other thing which has been talked about a lot is looking at the code and writing test cases. Speeding up the QA process for data, because data, it's a little bit different from writing software where you need to handle data anomalies more than software anomalies. So writing the right kind of test cases to manage any new change to a table or a column will be good, very low hanging fruits that we can quickly enable. A lot of these products offer stuff out of the box, but also it's very easy to access any kind of model you want off the shelf these days. So those are low hanging fruits. On using AI as an end product, I think one of the things that we have been thinking about very hard is intellectual property, like making sure we are very clear about where we have generated some of this from, like what is the inspiration. Of course, the model itself, we have to assume that's the starting point, but on top of the model, what are we doing to generate what we generate? And the second thing, again, putting on my platform hat, which is just building guardrails, because one key differentiator in generative AI solutions versus the traditional ones is accuracy and the correctness. So building ways, both algorithmic ways as well as maybe human in the loop kind of ways, to make sure that the output ends up being dependable and trustworthy. So creating maybe parallel ways of getting to the same solution and having a system check which one is the most accurate solution, only exposing that to the end user would be considerations for, at least if we were to embark on building AI products. We are in a data platform world right now, so we are not actively looking at building AI products, but even for internal use, when we build, these are the things that we feel like, for example, a knowledge management system, when we enable something like, hey, can you tell me why certain thing went up or down? You don't want that response, especially if it's a senior executive asking that question. You don't want that response to be 50% right. You want that to be like 99% right.
Yeah. And I think, as you speak through that, especially on the productivity side, you mentioned how do we have co-pilots or essentially AI helping engineers writing better, faster code to generate some of it on their own. I think the next step is also how do we leverage that to do some troubleshooting, debugging, optimization that we talked about earlier, for instance.
Yeah.
With all of that together, I think the question becomes, what are we feeding into AI, into the model? What MCP are we using in order to get the best context in order for it to be accurate, right? And make sure that it's, we don't have recommendation to do some software engineering based on a book from, the early 2000s.
Yeah, or the code assistant one. If you have, for the past 3 years, bad queries written in the system and you train your model based on the query patterns that exist today, you are only making the problems worse. So you need a way to say, here are the right queries and here are the queries that are wrong. So if someone says, I'm going to write it this way, you should be able to say, no, that's actually not the right way to do it. Do it this way. So even if you are going to rely on trustworthy sources, you have to know that those things were created by skilled SQL writers and bad SQL writers, both. So being able to distill that so that the response is actually meaningful is obviously a very key consideration.
We're getting to almost a close, so quick fire round. Just to kind of wrap up, what emerging technology, it's a question that I love asking folks that are deep in the space. What emerging technology actually did not explode or did not make the impact that you would imagine that it would?
I was in a fintech company when cryptography and blockchain were supposed to be the solution to solve all financial problems. I think things are maybe turning the corner a little bit, but the hype 5 years ago was definitely ahead of reality. The promise was amazing. Like, you have instant settlements. Who doesn't want that? But it just never materialized. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So, and the flip to that, what today is the emerging technology that you're most excited about kind of go forward?
I think that's an easy one. Generative AI definitely has a huge potential implication. We are already seeing so many things. I myself, even though I'm not coding at all, I'm seeing tremendous productivity gain. So yeah, I think generative AI, both as an enabler, which is the starting point for us within our context, but also as a product feature, both will have a huge impact starting yesterday and going into several years into the future. We are at truly ground floor of it still.
Maybe last question on that. So we just talked about kind of big shifts that we've seen, right, in terms of moving to data products and data as products and data democratization and platforming the organization. What advice would you give data product leaders in organizations that today are starting those shifts and are really moving there, gaining the scale? What would be your number one advice as they start on the journey?
If I were to summarize what I truly believe, it's don't skip out on doing things once for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I know it tends to make the central team a bottleneck. I'm not saying solve all the problems centrally, but don't skip out on, for example, metadata collection.
Mm-hmm.
A data catalog is typically only on the radar screen after a company matures. But by that time, you already have so much bad data that you have no history, right? So creating proper metadata collection, instrumenting your systems from day one, and collecting that telemetry so that you can act on how users are using your products, whether they are using it or not. All that, doing it once at the most foundational layer, is something you cannot reverse time. If you do it 3 years after you have started this, or 3 years into your startup, you are going to miss out on 3 years of history of how users behave with your system, or what kind of data you're collecting, or who's accessing what kind of data. All that is, I know for sure, not at top of everyone's priority, especially if you're in a startup, but you should keep one eye on it and build your things with an intention to collect some of that from the very beginning. That has tremendous impact everywhere. For the longest time, I used to say I work in data, and my normie friends or family would be like, oh yeah, you're somewhere in the back office. Now suddenly it's like data is everywhere. So you cannot do anything without good data. And what does good data mean? Like, you have to unpack all of this to get to what is good data, right? So do it right from the beginning. Have the systems in place, have guardrails in place from the beginning, not to inhibit velocity, but to make sure that when time comes for you to mature and be a proper enterprise grade organization, you have your pieces already and you just have to activate some of those things.
Absolutely. Romit, I really enjoyed our conversation today. Before we finally wrap up, if people want to follow you along with you or your work, what's the best place for them to go?
LinkedIn and Medium. On Medium, I'm THEROMIT, and my first name. And on LinkedIn, it's Romit-Mehta.
Perfect. So now they have where to go. So again, been a great conversation, learned a lot. Let's keep in touch, and thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Roy. My pleasure.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.